Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the online public meeting this afternoon, in which we are joined by North Yorkshire Police colleagues. On the call, I'll just do some introductions. We have a number of members of my team, Amanda Bowers and Simon Jones from the communications team, Rebecca Smith and Tamara Stevens and Mark Ayres are also on the call. And then we've got a number of police colleagues. Chief Constable Tim Forber is on the call, Deputy Chief Constable Scott Bissett is on the call, and we're also joined, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves because I'm not going to remember their titles correctly. Andrew Nuns, if you could just introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, it's Andy Nuns, Superintendent for Customer Contact.
Thank you. And Vicky?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vicky Taylor. I'm the Superintendent in charge of local policing support.
Thank you. The meeting is being live streamed. It will also be uploaded in the usual way, so it'll be available for people to watch in their own time. And the schedule for the afternoon is a review of the police performance data, which is done in the usual way. There's a thematic topic in which today we're going to look at the force control room and the response triage system, which is the right care, right person system. There'll then be a spotlight section on a number of areas, and finally the third party report section, and followed by some public questions that have been submitted. But just before we start on the performance section, I just wanted to formally thank the Chief Constable for his leadership and support to staff over the last 2 weeks or so since the very tragic death of PC Rosie Pryor. I know that there's been significant public condolences made, but I just wanted to make sure that we had formally recorded our condolences here, and I wanted to pass on my thanks to the Chief Constable for his leadership and support that I know he's been showing to staff who've been going through a really difficult time. Tim, I don't know whether you want to say anything before we formally start the meeting.
Well, I mean, thank you for that. I have to say, and it's nice of you to mention myself, but it's been a collective effort from the entire executive team, right across the force. You know, we're determined to do three things. One, we're going to support Rosie's family. Secondly, we're going to carry on, and colleagues are doing exactly that as we're sat here now, making sure that we protect the people of York and North Yorkshire. And we're going to make sure that Rosie's memory is forever in the DNA of this organisation. She's the 10th police officer to die in the line of duty since 1974, when the modern force as it is today was formed. And the same goes for each and every one of them. That sacrifice will always be remembered. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you just to all the staff who I know have been carrying on and working as normal as the police does, supporting the public and responding as it does every day, including on the day in which Rosie sadly died. So thank you to everybody who's continued to show the utmost professionalism at what I know is a really difficult time for people. Okay, I'm going to move on to the performance section of the meeting, which is a fairly regular set of slides, albeit that the numbers on them change. I've got a number of questions which I'm sure we'll go through during the course of the meeting, but we're passing over to the Deputy Chief Constable, I think.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, so Scott Bissett, Deputy Chief Constable, responsible for the performance of North Yorkshire Police. So just move on to the first slide, please. Just waiting for the first slide to move on. Thank you. So yeah, the first slide is a regular one, and people will have seen it before. So this basically outlines our current performance in relation to emergency 999 calls and non-emergency calls, which are predominantly made through the 101 system. So what you can see is, following an investment into the SCR over the past 2 years or so, is that improving performance as we go through. So if we stick to 999, that's the top green line there. You can see since January of 2024, and certainly since the middle of summer last year, when our recruitment and processes and systems really started picking up, that performance continues to improve. important to note that the national service level agreement for police forces is to answer 999 calls, 90% of them within 10 seconds. That, in fairness, has historically been a challenge for the force, and people won't need reminding that as recently as about 3 years ago, that was below 50%. So it represents some improvement. So you can see in the last 3 months, for the first time for a long time, the force has answered calls over 90% of the time for 999 within 10 seconds, which is positive. And that will continue. We're doing some work locally on taking additional time out of that by reconfiguring some of our IT, which Andy may well touch on when it comes to describing the work of the force control room. So I won't repeat that here. 101 answering times continue to improve month on month as well. What's really important here when we talk about the service level agreement for 101, we're one of the few forces to align to the national service level agreement, which is to answer 101 calls in under 3 minutes. That we think is going to be applied nationally. We've done that voluntarily at the moment because we think that's going to be the national measure, so we're benchmarking against that. You'll see gradual increase, but particularly during December, a 6% increase in answering 101 there. And again, we've had some investment in the FCR this month actually around a switchboard, which will make that much easier. So you can see there the average answer time for 101 is falling, and we're answering more within that SLA that we've set. And I've already mentioned this, but if people looked at the national data around BT, they would see a discrepancy between what BT report on their systems and what we report locally. Our metric is really clear. It's how long it takes us to pick up the call once it hits our internal systems and somebody answers it. And that's where the IT improvement work sits, is to ensure there's no delay in once the call is presented to a call taker and that we can pick it up. So it doesn't need more people. It just needs us to streamline our IT, which Andy, I'm sure, will talk about when it comes to him. The other part of call handling is making sure that we don't have high levels of abandoned calls. In the year to date, so since the 1st of April, we've had 75 abandoned 999 calls. In each and every case, they will be recontacted back. And that isn't necessarily that it takes a long time to answer the call. It could be, for example, a pocket dial of a 999. And what we do make sure that somebody isn't left. We make sure we bring them back. And if we can't bring them back and we're still worried about them, we'll attend their last known address or something of that nature. In terms of 101, the key measure actually is how many calls that people who ring 101 are abandoned. That for year to date is currently 14%. But if I look at last week, because we've had some technological changes during the year, that's down as low as 6%, which will be some of the best performance nationally. And that's because we're giving people the option of a ring back in a queue, like you would do if you rang your GP or other places, and when your turn comes, you don't lose your place, but you get a call back. Or you've got options to actually use our website, which can provide some really useful information that may address the issue, or actually choose another option from the menu. So that was implemented during the autumn, and we're really starting to see benefits from that, where people aren't being dropped out of the system, which we know is frustrating.
So, Scott, we're going to have to move slightly faster because we were only allowed, according to my schedule, supposedly 15 minutes for this entire section.
Yep.
So we're going to have to speed up. But I've just got a couple of questions just on this one, because I know it's been an issue that the public have raised either directly with my office in the past or via local elected representatives. Just a couple of questions. One was about how we're going to maintain that 90% standard, and it may be something that we could come back under the thematic to talk about a bit more when we talk about the control room more generally. And then you talked about the 101 abandonment being down to 6%. I suppose it's just really how do we maintain that and ensure that that becomes a consistent standard, so that we know that those that the public are getting the kind of expected kind of service all the time, and it isn't just because I know that people have been working really hard to get these numbers improved, but it was just really to see if what is happening to make sure that we achieve it for the long term.
Yeah, in the interest of time, if I let Andy pick that up, because I'm sure it'll come out of his presentation, if that's all right.
Yeah, no problem. In which case, let's move on. Yeah.
Okay. No problem. So next slide, please. Great stuff. So this slide, basically, the black line is how quickly, once we've received the call, we attend an incident. So the black line is how quickly we attend our calls that come from urban areas that are an emergency. Our performance expectation on this is to attend 80% within 15 minutes. You can see we've exceeded that for the time in the period that they've been measuring it, so that's good. Again, that will stand up to scrutiny nationally. And you can see the green line is how quickly we attend emergency incidents in rural areas. Now, the SLA for that is 20 minutes. We did a piece of work last year to narrow the gap between the percentage of which we attended, whether you were urban or rural, because you can easily exceed your overall target by really focusing on the urban areas, but that's not how we police. We police based on threat and risk and trying to deliver a good service across the county. That's really narrowed, and you can see in the last couple of months we've exceeded that target as well. The red line is how quickly we attend incidents that we grade as 1 hour, or how many of the incidents we grade in 1 hour within that hour, and that's about 75%, as you can see, and that's fairly consistent. We'd want to keep improving that, but that very much depends on what comes in at a certain time, where our resources are, and what they're doing. But I know Andy, colleagues in the FCR are looking to improve our performance around that, as our response colleagues out in the geographical commands.
And just in terms of those priority grade ones, the bullet point talks about them, the number missed by less than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It's just really to understand, obviously those are the small margins of error, but what's the kind of other end of it, if you like? What's the longest that it would be missed by, as in, you know, the calls are kind of listed as priority, but actually what would be the kind of maximum in that range that it could end up being?
It depends what the job is. So if we renegotiate with the caller because we might have something like an RTC or a significant incident, we'll always contact the caller back and negotiate a time. If we need to be there in the hour, then we will try and do that, or try and do it as soon as possible. But we also have a priority 12 incident, which is basically to get there within the 12 hours if we think that's acceptable to the caller and there's no enduring threat and risk. So it all depends on the individual nature of the incident itself.
Okay, but if it's listed as a priority, isn't that a certain kind of category of offence, or would something get recategorised if that was negotiated, or would it still be listed as priority?
It can go both ways. So it can actually be regraded to an emergency if some new information comes in and we make a new threat assessment, or if new information comes in during the hour, it can be categorized as another call. What we don't do is we don't recategorize just because we've missed it within the hour. So I think your question is, what is our longest wait time for a priority? We can certainly find that out on an individual incident and put that in the next pack.
I think Joe,
yeah, go on.
Deputy Mayor, if I can just come in, is that the two things that we do insist on is what if we do change the grading for whatever reason, there is a fresh risk assessment that justifies that, and the supervisory oversight, and they're the two critical ingredients. You know, but we'll get that data for you.
That would be really helpful. I think, you know, from a public point of view, people absolutely understand that if something else happens and their call isn't going to be met within a certain time frame, they might say, actually, do you know what, I've got to go to work, so actually it doesn't suit me for you to now attend. So they might decide that they would prefer to make an appointment for someone to attend. It's just understanding how that actually reflects what the public experience.
Yeah, we can certainly include that.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Next slide, please. So this slide is focused on current recorded crime and our performance in relation to reducing crime, and then the focus around offenders and arresting suspects. So what you can see from the first column there, I won't go down every line, but you can see in the bottom, it describes a 6.3% reduction in overall crime for North Yorkshire Police since the 1st of April of this year. You'll see some notable reductions in there. Robbery down just short of 15%, theft from person down nearly 23%, bicycle theft down 10%, fraud down 20%. So you can see some notable reductions in there. But what you'll also see is particularly shoplifting there, an increase of about 13%, just shy of. That reflects a national position. We're doing a lot of work around shoplifting, as you know.
Can you just tell me? It was on my list, Scott. If you can just tell us a little bit more about what you're doing around that shoplifting prevention and targeting.
Yeah, so we have dedicated retail crime officers now that work across the commands. They were recently introduced, so their main role is to work in partnership with retailers to understand who the key offenders are, to ensure that resources are visible and available, and understand the intelligence picture around those offenders, and ultimately to get the right criminal justice outcome where that's the appropriate way to do it. But what we're also doing process-wise is looking to improve how we can recover CCTV, for example. We do have some retailers with some very high-end capable CCTV systems, which also include facial recognition. We've introduced a new system recently where people can submit the footage online. That can be limited by the IT that the retailer themselves has got available to be able to do that, and we're conscious of that. So we don't want to discount anyone from being able to provide us with the evidence. But in support of the police and crime plan and the Mayor's desire around kind of improving market towns, and particularly York, Harrogate and other areas, there will be a continued focus on this. I think the main thing with it is looking at problem solving, prevention and offenders. Most shoplifters are repeat offenders. I was speaking to members of the public who own retail premises in North Allerton recently, and they know who the offenders are. They know who goes in regularly. You know, the whole approach to shop watchers around market towns and the way we bring retail, policing and other partners together is incredibly important. And that's going to be the answer to reducing retail theft, is in partnership, but with a keen edge around arresting suspects as we need to.
And perhaps if I just come in, the other thing that we're doing is locking up a lot of offenders. Our arrest rate for shoplifting has increased very significantly, and our overall detection rate for shoplifting has increased by 10 percentage points this year as compared to last year. In the coast, in the last 28 days, in excess of 50%, in excess of 50% of recorded shopliftings have resulted in them being detected. That's up there with the very best performance of any police force across the country.
Great. Look, this is, I know it's a work in progress, and but I also know you've had specific operations. I know I was there when you were in Scarborough just before Christmas. And I've also been speaking to a number of businesses during the course of the consultation that we've been doing around the priorities. I know the Mayor is also keen to ensure that we work as collaboratively as possible around his own High Street Fund, but also the work that the councils are doing on CCTV, and just making sure we join this stuff up as much as we possibly can, because that's kind of what residents want us to do, because that's what's in there and businesses' interests, to kind of work as collaboratively as we can, as you say, to get the shoplifters off the streets or into treatment if that's what's needed, to protect the public. Brilliant. Let's move on.
Yeah, next slide, please. So the Chief's just touched on this. This one describes our performance in relation to detecting crime. It's important to look at the scalar on the left-hand side of positive outcome. That's not 0 to 20. That's essentially just below 15% to above 19.5, 20% actually.
I was going to say that there is, it looks much more severe than it actually is in reality, because it doesn't start until 15. So I just think from a public point of view, there is something in that graphic that is probably slightly more alarming than it should be, because actually that range isn't as big as it looks.
Yeah, it's just important to look, and you will see those peaks and troughs, because some of this is about what happened over a very busy summer in terms of all the disorder we saw nationally, resources being committed to that kind of operation, up in Fusion in North Yorkshire itself at Drax. So the organisation kind of breathes in and breathes out as we respond to demand dynamically. And of course, it is busier in the summer than it tends to be. But that work is now coming through the autumn, and we can see that outcome rate improving. And if we look at our total outcome rate at just short of 17%, we've just had a comparison with renewed national data that demonstrates we're now the third strongest force in the country in terms of charging offenders out of 43. that's a significantly improved position in a very short time, in under 12 months, about how better we're becoming at investigation. There's still more to do. We need to detect more crime. We need to make sure that victims feel that they've got justice. But it's a good start in terms of that, and it just puts us nationally in a strong position.
Absolutely, and I would just also say that the other risk with some of this is that once you improve public confidence, which some of this does, you know, it really does help to boost people's confidence in terms of detections. But it also means that if people weren't reporting crimes, they didn't think anything was going to happen. Actually, if they now start reporting more crime, we could see our numbers going in the other direction because we get more reports. So it does then put more pressure on the force to make sure that we maintain those detection figures, both in terms of comparatively to the rest of the country, but also just locally in terms of how much crime we have.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, you know, my view of that is if that's the result and people have more confidence in us and report, that's a good thing. You know,
Absolutely.
that is a good thing. Crime figures are important, but how the public feel is more important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think you're aware as well that we've seen the latest crime survey of England and Wales, and we do have the highest level of confidence in policing of any other force. That's hard won and easily lost, and we don't take that for granted. But it's incredibly important if we're going to tackle crime effectively. People have confidence to report it to us. There's not a lot we can do about underreported crime. We can't see the problem. We haven't got visibility of it. So we do need people to report it.
Absolutely. And the other thing, it would be remiss of me not to point out that I know that it is great that we're now the third best performing force in terms of the detection rate. That still feels like a really low rate to a member of the public. And it is just important to kind of reflect that back, that I know it's good to be in that position, but 16.7% still feels to a member of the public quite low. I don't know if there's anything you can say about that process and, you know, those levels and maybe just I know that there's a lot of work going on, but just in terms of how the public understand that still feels quite low to people.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. Having been in policing now for nearly 3 decades, I think detection rates have always hovered, even when they were, you know, back in the sort of early 2000s, late 1990s. They've always hovered around these sort of rates. I think in terms of reassuring the public, the issues that you know, when you have 40,000 crimes, you don't have 40,000 people committing those crimes. And this is actually about pursuing offenders and making sure that wherever possible, we identify offenders and get them charged and get them before the courts or into treatment or wherever else the appropriate outcome is. And we always do try to identify additional offences that they may have committed along the way in order to provide that sense of justice for the victim. We're absolutely committed to this, and we're absolutely committed to making sure that North Yorkshire is a hostile place for people to come and commit crime. And that's really important because we know that one of the challenges we have with our large geography is the issue of travelling criminals that come into the county to make life a misery for the people who live here.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, we better move on.
Okay, yeah, next slide, please. This slide's just a summary of our performance in relation to antisocial behaviour. Clearly, really key for the community. It's about feeling safe, particularly the feeling safe element. So we've had a real focus on this year through our neighbourhood policing teams, who are the people who focus on prevention, visibility and problem solving in particular. And again, it's a small number of people, usually or a locationally based problem, in other words, licensed premises or city or town centres, where this really affects communities. So we've seen a reduction of about 16% of antisocial behaviour this year compared to last, and that's just short of 900 ASB reports. And we had another strong week last week where there were basically half the number of antisocial behaviour reports reported than there was the previous year. That really
Can I just ask about that peak in October, November time, which I think was half term? I was just aware. I was aware that
Halloween and bonfire night.
Yeah, so I was aware certainly in play. I was over in Selby, I think, immediately after that week, and there'd been a huge spate in that week. I suppose we can't do anything about what happened this last October, November, but I just wondered if there was any planning underway for that equivalent half term for this year in terms of, you know, anticipating that kind of thing in the future.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing new and unexpected about that. It's, you know, every year I've been a police officer, you see a spike in antisocial behaviour. We plan every year, and we do have an operation, and we do have extra resources out, and we'll continue to do that next year. And obviously, we always look if there's lessons learned. I think what's really important is that we have a longer term preventative approach. Dealing with the sale of fireworks is a big one. How, you know, what are retailers doing? Making sure that they're not selling fireworks to juveniles. That's really important, and we'll continue to be out there and be visible. So I suppose the short answer to your question is absolutely. We plan for half term, Halloween and bonfire night every year, as do the fire service. Yeah, no, thanks. Okay, Scott, we can move on. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So next slide should be describing stop search, and particular focus around ethnicity, and really important we get the use of this power right. It's an incredibly powerful and useful tool for policing, but it needs to be done in the right way, professionally, using our intelligence, and making sure we're not being disproportionate. So I don't know how much detail you want me to go on here. I think.
Can you just, the only thing I particularly wanted to dig into was just the actions that the force are undertaking to ensure we're not disproportionately targeting minority groups.
Yeah, so the key to that is actually recording the ethnicity data of the person that you're stopping and searching. Interestingly, I've chaired the Force Performance Board this morning, and this remains a standing agenda item on that in terms of accurate recording of ethnicity, and it's one of the areas for improvement from HMI in our last inspection. So we've done an awful lot of work to improve the way that officers understand that they need to record ethnicity at that point of contact, particularly if the individual themselves isn't willing to self-define it. We still need to record what we think, if you like, is the ethnicity of the individual that we're searching. So we're doing an education package through our personal protective safety training, which is essentially when we teach the tactic around stop search, how to do it safely, the use of force and the use of handcuffs. And we've also made it a mandatory field now within our systems, which mean an officer can't record the use of a stop search without recording the ethnicity of the person. And it was reported this morning at the Force Performance Board that we now have a above 90% compliance with that in terms of our recording more recently. So that's a really positive sign. Then what we need to look at is how disproportionate are we, if we are, against our resident population. This is a really complex area to try and define. I'm not sure anyone's successfully done it. What you really have to be clear about, we're recording the grounds, we're recording the intelligence accurately, and the supervisor has checked that record to make sure the officer has got those reasonable grounds in the Police and Criminal Evidence Act to be able to search that individual for the reasons that they said. So it's about scrutiny, it's about control, it's about how our IT doesn't allow people to skip through that, and it's about our officers and staff actually doing what we're asking them to do, which the evidence is that they are now starting to do that more regularly than they were.
Thank you, that's great. Yeah, we can move on.
Okay, and then this is the final slide, which is essentially our establishment, if you like, of police officers, PCSO, staff, volunteers and specials. I think if you've gone back probably 2.5, 3 years, the strategic workforce planning that sat around this was perhaps not as strong as it is now in terms of understanding where our resources need to be and what they need to be doing in terms of the threat and risk that we face. Again, Force Performance Board this morning, we covered our recruitment plans around officers. Special constables have made an amazing contribution last year, so they've given us 26,000 hours of volunteering time into policing. That's an increase of about 5,000 hours over the year, which is incredible, from about 78 people. We maintain our police officer headcount, which is fundamental for the budget, because as you'll know, the government are now not having an uplift target, but a maintenance target about police officer numbers. So it's really important at those key times of year that we show we are at that target, and our number of police officers will be retained. Our head count of about 1673, as you see on there. So we won't be dropping those numbers. And then you can see our PCSOs. We are going through a neighbourhood review at the moment, and we're just finalising what that looks like.
Right, brilliant, thank you. A couple of questions on that one. Just in terms of police officer numbers, just a couple of questions. I had a question about the gender balance of police officers. Obviously, I can see what it is across the force, but whether or not there are huge discrepancies between different types of teams. Just in terms of the work that I know the force is doing in terms of improving the diversity of the workforce. Obviously, you know, we've got I can't quite read it here. Is it 20? Is it 39 or 29? That's my eyes. 39% female. Workforce. But actually, I assume that is slightly skewed into different teams, and just whether the force also reviews, for example, I don't know what the diversity is within, I don't know, the armed response unit, for example, or within certain types of policing, just to ensure that any work that's happening around diversity is targeted, I guess, potentially at where it might be most needed. And then my other question on police officer numbers was just to understand how many of those are currently in neighbourhood policing. And I know you're doing that review at the moment, but I think this came up at the OPM before I started, but about a year ago, or maybe at some point last year, which also looked at those PC numbers in neighbourhood policing, just really to understand a little bit about where we're at currently in terms of those numbers around neighbour policing as well.
Yeah, okay, yeah, so shall I pick the second bit up first, if that's all right? So
whatever works.
Yeah, so last year we uplifted eight constables into neighbourhood policing at the end of the last financial year. So you've seen that uplift going this year. So that's taken us to around 135 neighbourhood policing officers. That includes inspectors, sergeants, and of course what we did do to give us more focus around neighbourhood policing in our localities, our 3 geographic commands, is we appointed a dedicated chief inspector, a senior leader, to really own neighbourhood policing, drive the quality of that, and make sure we were being productive and as focused as possible, and particularly around our ability to tackle offenders, problem solve, and conduct community engagement. Because we believe our neighbourhood policing teams do a really cracking job around instilling confidence, but we really need to focus and bear down on that crime problem solving and demand and crime prevention. So there's no plan to reduce police officers in neighbourhood policing teams. In fact, there will be a plan over the coming period to look to increase those in line with certainly the Chief's mission to strengthen neighbourhood policing around officers and that harder edge of offender management and arresting local offenders. But I'll let the Chief come in.
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up on that, I mean, I've been very clear that I want to lead a preventative force, not a reactive force. That's really, really important. It goes right back to the Peelian principles of policing, and it's what communities want. And we know that as part of our neighbourhood review, we've undertaken a survey. We've got I think it was about 5,000 responses from across the county in terms of the sort of things that people want to see from their neighbourhood teams. And absolutely, it is my ambition to put more police officers into neighbourhood policing, doing proactive, preventative, targeted work to keep people safe and to continue to build on the success that we've had this year. As Scott said, crime down by 6%, ASB down by 16%. The key enablers for us doing that are to make the people who do the responding, and we talked about how our response to calls for service has improved this year. We need to make them more productive. We need to make them more efficient. So we need to squeeze that reactive ball of work as small as possible. And the key enabler to that over the course of the next 12 or 18 months is about an investment in our technology, victim journey software, a mobile solution, rapid video response software to enable us to have a better interaction quicker with people who contact us. They're the key enablers for the forthcoming year, absolutely, to realise that ambition of stronger neighbourhood policing.
Great. Could one of you come back on my diversity question in terms of police officers, please?
So yes, perhaps if you use an example of the specialist ops department, so that's things like our dogs unit, firearm support unit, our specialist search team. So that higher level of specialist, I think that's probably what you were aiming at, Joe, around the question. So for example, the female representation in the firearm support unit is about 6%. In firearms training, it's about 10%, and in our specialist ops department overall, it's just short of 18%. That's clearly out of kilter, if you like, with our overall percentage of police officers in the force, which I should say, even at 39%, needs to have more balance in terms of women in the workforce. So we continue to work on that. Some of the work that we do for some of the specialist units, because they are different demands. They are, you know, for example, they will define a national fitness test, for example. So we've done some work about looking at how we can encourage more women officers to apply for those jobs, and looking at the recruitment process and how we can absolutely ensure that with an officer of the right quality and the right aptitude, but perhaps looking at that recruitment process, which can disadvantage people. So that work's ongoing. There's a lot of proactivity by specialist operations to familiarise people who may not have seen themselves in a unit like that and may not have actually naturally thought that's for me. But we have some fantastic women role models within specialist operations that we're very proud of and the work that they do. But there is more work to do. So it's a work in progress. We understand where we are. There's more work to do in terms of encouraging more applications from women into the police service as a whole, and that will continue.
And if I just add to that, you know, we've been very keen as we've built the senior team across the course of the past 12 months to make sure that we have got a balance across that team, that it reflects a whole range of skills and abilities. And you'll be aware, obviously, half the executive team, half our executive colleagues are female. If you look at our operational commanders, commanding our 3 commands, 2 out of 3 are women, and we've got some brilliant role models right across the force who are doing an absolutely fantastic job.
Great. And just sorry, and then just briefly on the PCSOs. So at the moment, and I think it was the case last time, although I'm trying to remember the last sets of slides that I've looked at since I've been in role. 100% of our PCSOs are white, and actually on male-female ratios, we're doing slightly better than we do with police officer numbers. I just really what is happening in terms of improving that diversity. You know, I don't know what happens in terms of any changes in those numbers or in terms of recruitment programs or whatever it is, but just, you know, I'm just very mindful that that is a very undiverse, certainly in terms of ethnic diversity, it's a very undiverse group within the force. And obviously those are the very, you know, whilst police officer numbers will be spread over a whole load of different disciplines in terms of policing, the PCSOs will all be in neighbourhood policing. Is that right?
Yeah, but well, there will be as a result of the work that we're doing to make sure that their PCSOs are frontline geographically based, other than a very small number that, for example, will be antisocial behaviour specialists, to make sure that the public get the requirement that they want. I think the first thing, so I mean, I used to work in West Yorkshire and did a lot of policing experience in Bradford, where you've got a very different community makeup in terms of diversity. So, for example, over there, you would have around 50% are white British, the other 50% aren't. So the communities are very different. The Chief and I have discussed this. I think that brings a larger requirement actually to make sure we're diverse, because some of our communities may feel isolated and kind of not being able to think about accessing the police. So we have had a positive action approach for some time. We have a dedicated resource that works corporately across the organisation, and particularly with our neighbourhood policing teams, to complement the work they do to understand where communities are in the county. Those positive action mentors and coaches and officers and staff will identify people who may well be thinking about joining the police and try and explain what the job's about and give that reassurance that we are an employer of choice. We want people to join us from a diverse background because it increases the quality of police and the way we can keep people who live and work and visit North Yorkshire safe. So there's a positive action programme. There's also a programme around improving our insight into the work we need to do to improve our services to minority communities. And one example, and I know Vicky's on the call, is the work we do around hate crime, because if we don't get our response to hate crime right, for example, then people are less likely to think that we're somebody worth working for if the service they receive isn't responsive. So it covers a number of different areas. It covers our response, it covers our engagement through neighbourhood policing. Ultimately, it comes down to the confidence of communities in us and the responsibility on us to really promote the job of policing as a career for people.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. We can move on, and apologies to the two superintendents on the call for taking so long on that section. I was just looking at my timings, so apologies for that. We can move on to the what I think is called the thematic topic, which is going to be around the force control room and the efficacy of the right care, right person, which has been operating in the control room. The floor, I don't know who's going to go first, but the floor is yours. I've got, if we can go through it slide by slide, I haven't got questions on every slide, so, but I have got questions on some of them.
Of course, Deputy Mayor, thank you. I'll start, and then it'll naturally hand over to Vicky when we get to the right care, right person elements of the slide pack. So if we can go to slide number 1 then, please. As we've seen in the performance element, for the snippet of January, we're doing fantastically well around our 999 performance. The graphic that's on the screen here shows you where we were back in 2022 up to present day, and it's important to see that we started in late 2022 with the business case preparation and the investment that then followed, and you can see the upward trajectory in our SLA compliance around 999, and importantly the reduction in wait time and the reduction in the calls that wait longer than 2 minutes, going in the opposite direction, which is fantastic. You know, nationally, as the DEP has said, 90% is the standard nationally. We are consistently above 87, and in the last 3 months we've been above 90%, and currently tracking at 96% for this month alone. And then on the over 2 minutes list, nationally, BT provide a report to all forces and is accessible nationally to everyone to see if any force has got any calls that have waited 50 times more than 2 minutes, and we've not been on that list now since January 2023. Next slide,
Great.
please.
Oh, sorry, just 1 second
sorry.
on that one before you move on. Just quickly on when and where the pressure points are, and any of the factors, if you just say a little bit about the factors that contribute to a call potentially taking more than 2 minutes, presumably when there's an awful lot of calls about the same incident potentially, or if there's a particular issue with staffing. But if you could just, from a force control room point of view, just from a public reassurance point of view, it's useful for people to understand the points at which it might take longer than the 2 minutes. Absolutely.
Yeah, the most common is an influx of calls. For instance, you know, an incident when we had the bad weather with the trees down, and we got a sudden influx at the first thing in the morning. When you look at demand analysis, we wouldn't expect that volume of calls at that time of day. We've actually got a piece of software coming online in the next few months around our workforce management demand profiling, which will look backwards and dictate where we can anticipate that call demand to rise and fall, so we can staff it accordingly. We have done some work around that manually and increased it by 30% across the board, again contributing to us answering far more in the 90% bracket. But generally, it will be for that, you know, sudden event like an RTC or an adverse weather incident.
Great, thank you. And look, I'm aware of the kind of stress and pressure that staff who work in the control room are working under. So, you know, getting to those calls that quickly is a really, really difficult job. So thank you to all the staff who are working in the control room, because I know how stressful and difficult that job can be. But thank you for that kind of piece of reassurance. I think people would understand if there was a particular either incident or event, like, as you say, after bad weather. We may have some this weekend in the storms that are forecast. But thank you. We can move on to the next slide.
Thank you. So yeah, so the next one is around our 101, so our non-emergency line. As Adept talked about, we've adjusted our measuring around the 3-minute SLA, which we are looking at is coming online nationally, and that's how it's going to be reported on any of the national documentation. Will be, you know, how long does it take your police service to answer a non-emergency? Within that, you can see we're achieving now up into the 80% bracket of all 101 calls coming online. We've seen a vast increase since we turned our switchboard live in December, and it's now up and running and fully staffed. Importantly to note around that, the 10% target is well and truly under. We're now averaging 6% across the board abandonment rate. The piece of technology that we're trying to implement as soon as possible is understanding the shift in that channel. So if you hang up on 101, do you go online? We can't quite track that at the moment, but we'd like to understand that. You know, understandably, people want to call us about something, but they also might want to report it online. And secondly to that, we've got live chat goes live at the end of this month, whereby, like you would contact your bank or building society, etc., you can go online and text us, and we can have a text conversation on live chat if it's something that we can answer straight away, and that will be monitored during office hours.
Great. And look, I know that there is an issue here in terms of what people's historic memory is around 101 response times, and it just really whether there's anything else that can be done around public reassurance about this shift and how we communicate the progress that I know has been made, because actually I still hear quite regularly calls and people telling me that they've tried to get through and it's taken however many minutes they tell me, and I think until those kind of stories start to dissipate, we aren't quite winning the public reassurance point. I don't know whether the Chief Constable wants to come back on that. Oh, you're on mute, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. The public mentioned it to you. I always get told about the call that someone had to wait. We monitor this daily, and I get sight of our daily performance personally at 8:30 every single morning. This is always a conundrum, because ultimately when people want to contact you by telephone, it's the number of people you've got to answer the phone versus the number of calls that are coming in. And we could halve this again by employing another 40 call takers in the control room, but I have to make choices about how I manage the operating model of the force across the board. And I think at the moment we've probably got the balance about right, but you'll expect me to say this. Critical to maintaining this is about the investment in technology. As a force, my observation is that we are underinvested in technology. If you look at some of the software that Hampshire and Thames Valley have implemented recently, they've taken their 101 answer time from 10 minutes down to less than a minute. Well, if our starting point is where it is today, 3 minutes, if we were to employ some similar software, I'm confident that we can continue to provide an absolutely exemplary service and make sure that we can create the channel shift that many of the people that we are here to serve would like to see. But we need to create those channels and make sure that they're available to everyone all the time.
Great, thank you. That's really reassuring. Thank you. Sorry, apologies. We can move on.
Thank you. So this slide, this represents over the last 18 months, 2 years, how we deal with risk assessments around callers. So when when someone rings in, we apply a Thrive assessment, and within that Thrive assessment, we're trying to understand not only the nature of the call, but what is the risk associated with that call or that incident, and how might we respond to it. Then it follows naturally into a grading system of immediate priority grades, as we've discussed. Prior to 2023, late 2022, we had no way to record this metric in the way that we do now. And this is picked up every morning, as the Chief has said, at 8:30, and it's reported on a band by band basis. And you can see there that we are up to 99% on average. 100% of all logs gain a Thrive assessment, so that's the risk assessment. Understanding that not all logs will require it, so a police officer that's already at a scene calling a job in doesn't need a risk assessment doing, because they're already there, and that would get created as a blank document for them. But the important one to point out on here, Deputy Mayor, is the re-Thrive compliance. So that's the reassessment, and we talked about that earlier. And Mr. Bissett talked about how do we then regrade if it's needed? How do we then recontact? That's all caught up in that re-Thrive assessment. So we expect, and we monitor every day, that a minimum of 100% of all regraded incidents have been re-Thrived. So we can show the workings out of why is that incident changed grade, and we monitor that on a daily basis, and we're satisfied that we're actually above 100% now, and we're contacting people when we need to, and we're keeping the public informed of our attendance and what that risk is that's sat in there of all our incidents.
That's really helpful, and that's a really good explanation, which I did have a question about, but I don't now because you've explained it so well. So thank you. We can move on.
And this slide here is around immediate incidents, and I know it does talk a little bit around the one we saw in the performance pack around the response times. So I'm not sure how much you want me to go into this, Deputy Mayor, but we are consistently above that 80% target for our immediate incidents. And as you can see there, it's 15 minutes urban and 20 minutes on rural.
No, we've dealt with response times. I think this is just another way of explaining it. And we've already talked a lot about what's happening to try and maintain those levels of performance. So I think that's fine. So thank you. We can move to the next one.
Cool. And this is the same for priority incidents. And this is important. This is priority 1. So it's the 60-minute response time, the P1 as we would call it, and grade it within the control room. And again, it's a similar metric to what we saw on the main performance element of this pack.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
And the next steps around the force control room and customer contact widely. Live chat, I've touched on already. That goes online at the end of this month, where people can contact us via a text facility and we can reply immediately. That will then improve the increase in our single online home reporting forms. We've just turned on some more now around shooting and some firearms licensing elements. We've discussed the switchboard has gone live with 12 new operators. I actually got an email the other day, I think, telling me there was something wrong with our phone line because someone got straight through to somebody. I actually had to point out it was a switchboard that is now active. So that was great feedback. In terms of technology, as the Chief spoke about, the seamless platform is the elements of everything we have within the control room. We're looking to make that as seamless as possible, that you can understand that things are plugged into each other and maybe not talking as efficiently as they are. What we do know is from the time a call comes in, we've got approximately 4 seconds where that call routes through our system. We're just in the process within the next week or so where we'll be able to take an additional 2 seconds out of that. So the call will arrive another 2 seconds quicker. And in this space, those seconds really do make a huge difference. The citizens engagement. Yeah, absolutely. The citizens engagement portal will be a 2-way portal, similar to live chat, but it will give you direct updates on your crime report and direct contact with an officer in your case, and then with you at a time that suits you. And the video response is around the rapid video response that we're looking to roll out later in the year to give us that immediate access to video and capture evidence as we need to as quickly as possible. In terms of our recruitment, we've gone from 72 call handlers to 112, and we're just at 109.6 at the moment, as we're well on our way to delivering that. And we continually increase our knowledge and our CPD for our call handlers, because you can imagine every call that comes in is different, and they've got to be, you've got to be on top of all of the work and the changes to legislation, etc. around that. And pleasingly today, it's good timing, is our wellbeing day, which is down at the Barbican, where they're getting some inputs around their well-being, because as we do see and hear, it's a very stressful environment, when they're plugged into their headset and taking the calls continually. So we're valuing our people as much as we can.
Yeah, I went there. Thank you. I went to meet your welfare team last week, and they do an incredible job. I wanted to really just ask whether there's anything else you can say around the welfare and the support for staff, particularly in that environment where I know it is incredibly stressful. And also, I think people don't probably appreciate how much trauma people in the control room are being exposed to. Just anything else you can add about that? And then the other question I had was just, when is the live chat going live? I can't remember whether you've just mentioned it or not, but if you could just clarify.
Deb, do you want to go first?
Thanks. I was just going to say, you know, I think you're absolutely right, Deputy Mayor, about the trauma that those staff incur when they're doing a job. They are truly the first responders very often. So whereas, you know, it's easy to think that uniformed police officers will be first there, a call taker could well have been on the telephone to somebody for some significant time, dealing with someone in a great deal of distress or in a lot of danger. And I think that's really easily overlooked, far too easily overlooked. And of course, I would imagine, I've never done it, but I would imagine it's a lot more difficult to reconcile dealing with somebody like that when you can't see them or actually give them any practical help because you're not there, as it is as when you turn up and start doing stuff, which is equally traumatic. So I think your point is really well made, and I'm sure Andy will add to that.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. In addition to that, we offer welfare support for our teams in that they can acknowledge when they want to speak to somebody without actually having to get up from their seat, and they can put themselves into a welfare code, and a supervisor will come and speak to them and take them out of the room if needed. But as well as that, we have fortnightly visits from the force nurse and welfare advisors into the control room, where they can go and have a sit down and have a conversation around anything they so wish. And that's a regular recurrence. And we also have visits from the welfare dog, which are always greatly received when they come around. In terms of the answer to the live chat, that goes live on the 3rd of February.
Oh, great. So imminently. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's really, I mean, look, there's a particular skill, isn't there, with someone who is working in that control room, just being able to do the job that they do. I think, I suppose the only thing that I just kind of stays with me is just the need to ensure that people are aware that that support is there. And I know there is a real kind of balance to be found between, I know the performance data, which we've just been looking at, is really, really important, and it's really important to the public, but the welfare of those staff is also really, really important. And those are two quite difficult things to balance. And I know that you're doing a really, tricky balance between those two things. So thank you for all of that. And certainly thank you to all the staff in the control room for doing what I know is a really, really difficult job, and still managing to hit that performance data, which, is really challenging as well. So thank you for treading that balance. I think we're moving on to Superintendent Taylor. Is that right?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Superintendent Nuns. That's been really helpful.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So before I go into the detail of the progress that's been made with Right Care, Right Person, I think it's probably an opportune moment to refresh people's memories about what actually Right Care, Right Person is. So Right Care, Right Person aims to reduce harm by ensuring individuals and communities receive the right support from the most appropriate agency the first time. So it's an operational model that provides guidance on the way North Yorkshire Police respond to health-related calls. And that's very much about ensuring that the right agency deals with the calls, as opposed to the police being the default first responder, where there are concerns about an individual's mental or physical health. So currently, RCRP is only applied to calls from acute hospitals, mental health services and social care. However, the strategic intention moving forward is to apply this to calls from members of the public and also to children and young people, which I'll go on into later slides. So to put it really simply, this is about if you broke your leg on the street now, you want a doctor to fix your leg, you don't want the police there. If your house is burgled, you want the police to attend to that call. So this is about ensuring the police are dealing with the right call and that the right agency is servicing our members of the public. And nationally, what was being found in a lot of police forces was that the police were picking up calls from other services which the police weren't equipped or trained to deal with. It was pulling them away from the core duties, and most importantly, that member of public wasn't receiving the service that they should receive.
Yeah, can I just ask, so obviously we've had a previous meeting about right care, right person, but at the moment, as you say in the slide, the referrals and the calls only come through kind of agencies, for want of a better word. If there was a change and you were able to take direct calls from the public, what would that kind of mean just in terms of the difference? What's not in scope currently that would be in scope then?
So at the moment, we only apply RCRP to partner agencies. So from any phone calls from those people, the hospitals, mental health services and social care, they're the only people we apply RCRP to. If we, or when we move to applying it to members of the public, we will ensure that the call taker signposts that member of public to the most appropriate agency. But if there is still an Article 2 or an Article 3 need from that member of public, then the police will still respond. So this isn't about the police walking away and not attending calls for service where we need to be at. We will still go to those, but where we are not the most appropriate agency, then we'll signpost that member of public appropriately. Now, what assists in the force control room is the service directory. So the call takers can look straight away at key agencies which can help a member of public. But equally, this is about us working with partner agencies as well behind the scenes to make sure that they've got their policies and processes where they need to be to perhaps adapt some of their working practices where they need to.
Brilliant, thank you. Sorry, apologies, just to pick you up on a bit of jargon there. What's Article 2 or 3 need?
So, sorry, Article 2 is a right to life, and Article 3 is a right not to have inhumane treatment, a right not to be tortured, degrading treatment as part of the human rights.
Okay, so that would be, those would be grounds on which you would still be responding.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. So just a bit of background on how we've progressed with RCRP. So I've been involved with RCRP right since the early discussions back in 2022, and then through to its delivery and implementation on the 31st of January 2023, where we went live with acute and mental health hospitals. And then following that in phase 2 with social care on the 31st of March 2023. We then went into our third phase, which was integration of RCRP into business as usual, and we established joint strategic governance within RCRP. That includes a right care, right person panel meeting, which is a really productive forum. We have over 130 invitees to that meeting, and that's where agencies can submit on a monthly basis any cases they may have dealt with where, for example, they can't understand why the police may have reacted in the way they have to a particular incident. Conversely, the same for the police. It might be us challenging appropriately why we've been perhaps at a mental health hospital with a patient and not being able to hand over a patient in appropriate timeframes, because whilst we're with that patient, obviously that impacts on other calls for service that the police should be attending as well. So we've found that RCRP panel meeting, it's a very tactical meeting, it's a very productive meeting, it's something that's been commented on favourably with the 2 peer reviews that I've had carried out on RCRP by the College of Policing, and that continues to go from strength to strength. It's jointly chaired by ourselves and Tees Esquire Valley. Gary Matfin and Danny Leach and Mark Wood are the key tactical chairs of that, and that enables that the force control room element in terms of the triage team to input where they think the right agency needs to intervene with that member of public, or partner agency needs to perhaps adopt or adapt certain policies or procedures.
Can I just ask on just on that point on the slide around the reviewing of case studies and the kind of tactical monitoring that you're doing, is there anything you can say around the gaps currently, and particularly just in terms of, obviously in my role as Deputy Mayor, I'm also able to engage as part of the combined authority. It's just really useful to be able to understand where the gaps are and whether there are any needs to convene partners at a different level, really, to understand the impact that some of this might be having on the police force.
Yeah, so I think, and this is something we discussed very recently, our strategic board meeting. I think where we have some gaps is where we have people that have got into mental health crisis and are perhaps waiting for an appointment for their mental health issue. But then we have people lower down the chain, if you like, who aren't in that immediate mental health crisis, but they are still putting a demand on services for some sort of assistance. So for me, and this comes back to the conversation about prevention and early intervention. I think there's something about having an agency or some sort of commissioned service. For example, if you've got a young person who might be waiting a long time for an appointment with the children adult mental health services, is there a commissioned service that could step in to offer some sort of support? Now, I know in some areas of North Yorkshire we've had something called social prescribing to help, I think, plug some of those gaps. I think there's something around that service perhaps evolving, and I think it's something I know our health partners and children's services would be very keen to see happen.
So that's really interesting. So we're not talking about the crisis level, because actually that is the thing that Right Care, Right Person probably is able to respond to. It's the level below crisis where someone has got a mental health, really severe mental health need, but they're not in crisis. And actually there isn't enough support at that level. That's really helpful. Thank you. If it's okay with you, Superintendent, we can move to the next slide.
Yep. Okay, no problem. So this is just two very quick and straightforward examples of why we needed RCRP. So these are proper incidents that have come into the force control room where we have declined to attend, but traditionally we have taken a lot of calls around this sort of thing. So the first one being a report of a male who had absconded from hospital having removed a cannula from his arm. The male had capacity to make his own decision to leave and no serious risk was identified. The hospital continued to have a duty of care and the police had no powers to return him. That isn't an incident the police should be dealing with. And then secondly, there was a call to the 111 NHS helpline to state a female had disclosed taking a number of tablets and that an ambulance had been called for the female. So why would we need the police to attend? So why have the police been rung in the first place? And we are aware from some of the discussions with our partners who have been very candid in some circumstances to say that some of their policies, which were perhaps older policies, still had in as a default, contact the police, inform the police. So it's about amending those policies and procedures, which is where the forum comes into its own to discuss where perhaps those policies and procedures need amending.
Yeah, so it's basically just because it's an emergency, it doesn't mean that it's an emergency that necessarily requires a police response.
Absolutely,
that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please.
on the call, I'll just do some introductions.
Okay, so the
We have a
strategic
number of
group,
members of
this
my
was
team,
established
Amanda Barron,
in
Simon
September
Jones from the
2024,
communications
and again,
team,
this is a
Rebecca
jointly
Smith
chaired
and
group
Tamara
by
Stevens and Mark
ourselves with
Ayres,
ACC Catherine Clark
also on the
and the
call.
Tees
And then we've
Esk
got a
and Weir
number of
Valley
police
Chief Executive
colleagues,
Brent Kilmurray.
Chief Constable
We are
Tim
currently
Corbett is on the call,
exploring
Deputy Chief
applying
Constable Scott
RCRP
Bissett is
to
on the
children
call, and
and
we're
members of
also
the
joined, I'm going to
public.
ask them to introduce themselves
We're in a
because I'm not
position
going to
where
remember
we
their
have
titles
a
correctly.
policy in
Andrew,
draft,
Nans, if you could just
which
introduce yourself.
Andy, who's on the
Good afternoon,
call,
Andy
has
Nunn,
done a
Secretary
lot
for
of
the
work
Police
with.
Contract.
And then
you.
we are
And,
looking
Vicky?
to explore Good applying this afternoon, to children everyone. and I'm young Vicky people. Taylor. I'm the It's superintendent very in charge of important when local we look policing at this support. that we're following the
Thank
steer
you.
from the College of
meeting is being
Policing
live streamed. It
and the
will also
implementation
be
principles, for
uploaded
instance,
in
involving
the usual
children,
way, so it'll be
which were
available for
written and
people
agreed
to
by the
watch in their own
Association of
time.
Directors of
And
Children's
the schedule for the
Services,
afternoon
Department
is
of
a performance
Education and other
review and
safeguarding
performance
partners.
data,
Children
which is
will
done in the
always
usual
be
way. There's a
classed as
thematic
vulnerable.
topic
They
in
are
which today
inherently
we're going to look
vulnerable.
at
So
the
when we
force
do
control room and
decide
the
to press
response
the
triage
button and
system,
apply
which is
it to
the right
children
care,
and
right
young
person
people,
system.
we will need to be in a
There'll then
position
be
to
a
ensure
spotlight
our
section on a
policies and
number of
procedures
areas,
are where they
finally
need to
the
be,
third-party
and that our
report
call
section,
data sets
followed by
that our call takers would do when somebody rings the control room, that they are robust and that they have appropriate risk assessments attached to them. So currently we're having a number of discussions with some of our partners around that, looking at forces that have already applied this to children and young people. Quite a lot of forces nationally are already well down the road with this. The approach we've taken in North Yorkshire Police is a step-by-step approach, working very much with our partners rather than doing it to our partners. And I think we will get more longevity with the policy if we work in that way, and that's certainly
Can I
proven
just
to be
check?
the
Sorry to interrupt. Can I just check that some of your partners that you're talking to, are they the two children's services departments,
Yes.
the two directors of children's services and the two local authorities?
They are indeed, yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, they would be the people I would be most concerned to be properly cited. But if you're working with them, that all sounds very sensible.
Okay, next slide, please.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is about the force control room training. So the RCRP policy is crucial for the FCR. The calls are dealt with by the force control room, so it's absolutely essential that the staff have the right training in order to be able to apply the policy correctly and that we don't get any adverse outcomes. So as part of that, the training is delivered jointly by ourselves and Tees Esk Weir Valley. A tabletop exercise is used using a previous mental health related call, and that provides staff an opportunity to think about the threat, harm and risk and apply the national decision making model. It enables insight and learning to other options available with mental health services and highlights the advantages of RCRP to call takers. Culturally, some forces found that some call takers were reluctant to apply RCRP when it was first initiated, because they always want to help people, but actually by helping we can make matters worse. Having a police officer turn up in uniform when somebody's having a mental health crisis is not in most cases the person they want to see, and can actually put quite a bit of a barrier between that person and the police going forward. So we continue to dip sample RCRP incidents to make sure they've been dealt with correctly. The forum is another arena in which we do that as well, and that will be ongoing training which is provided to the FCR as we keep moving forward to this. Obviously, once we start applying to children and young people, when the time comes, there'll be a new round of training to instigate.
Great. And just in terms of the toolkit, can you just say a little bit more about what's in it and what that kind of involves in terms of how it supports the call takers?
Yeah, so the toolkit is basically a series of questions so that when a member of public rings up, the call taker is asking the appropriate questions of the member of public, and if you like, takes them through a little bit of a flow chart so that they are appropriately managing that call for service.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Superintendent. That's been really useful. I know that this is something that particularly the Police and Crime Panel, who scrutinised me, have asked about previously, and that I think is really reassuring. It may be that once the criteria for right care, right person are reviewed, that this is a useful topic for us to come back to. Deputy Chief Constable, did you want to come in? Can't hear you. Can't hear you, sorry.
I think you're on mute, boss.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Sorry. Yeah, I think we've been, I was here when this was first started being discussed, maybe just over 2 years ago. I think North Yorkshire Police have been very considerate in its approach. And certainly I was probably risk averse, might be the right term actually, when we first brought it in, to make sure that we weren't exposing people to risk. It was linked to the improvement in the force control room. So as we were building capability in there, I felt there needed to be more capacity and confidence within a room itself to manage this properly. Of course, we've seen that's the case now. And we were actually, I felt, criticised by the College of Policing in a peer review for not being more robust. My personal view is I think we've done it in the right way. I think we've done it in that way that we step through the risk properly, which now gets to the opportunity to consider children in the reflective way that we're talking about. But absolutely, Stuart and Martin are fundamental to that conversation. The director to children, sorry. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you to both the superintendents for that input. It's been incredibly useful, and I know that you're both extremely busy. We've got some additional sections we need to move on to. Apologies that I'm overrunning. I always overrun in these meetings. If either of the superintendents need to leave, I know we were supposed to finish. We have got the spotlight sections just to go through, and then a small section on the third-party reports, and then some public questions. But if the two superintendents in particular don't need to stay, they're very welcome to leave at this point if that's useful for them. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Thank you. Right, we can move on to the spotlight section, and I don't know how, I forgot to check how this works. Do we put anything on the screen, or do I just talk? Do I just talk, Mark? Yes. Fine. Or are there some slides? I actually can't remember. Can someone just clarify whether I'm supposed
There's no
to
slide. There's no slide.
There's no slide. Okay, fine. Sorry, so this is an opportunity for me to raise some issues that have come to my attention outside of the kind of specific thematics that we've been looking at already. So one of those was just to talk briefly around police reform, and I know that there've been significant reforms announced by the Home Secretary, which was at the NPCC conference a couple of months ago, that I know that both I and the Deputy Chief Constable were at. It was really just to ask the force how they were preparing for those changes in terms of policing, and particularly around the refocus on the neighbourhood policing guarantee, and the plans to increase police forces across the country by 13,000 more neighbourhood police. Anything you can say around that, or around the processes in taking people on?
Yeah, so it's really welcome the focus on neighbourhood policing, because you know, as I've said at every juncture, both thing apply for this job, and since I've been the Chief Constable, strong neighbourhood policing that prevents crime and protects communities is absolutely the direction of travel for North Yorkshire Police. In terms of police reform, I think some of the detail of that needs to be fleshed out from central government, particularly in terms of what it will look like. From a chief officer's perspective, the NPCC has seconded an assistant commissioner from the Metropolitan Policing to give the policing input into that police reform, and I have regular inputs around that through Chief Constables Council with my fellow Chief Constables from up and down the country. In terms of our ability to recruit extra officers, to train them, we do have the infrastructure to do that. Obviously, the infrastructure was put in place a number of years ago to deal with the police uplift, which has allowed us that capacity to be able to bring officers in and train them. And more recently, as you're aware, we have completed a review of our broader enabling services function to make sure that we have got the sufficient capacity and capability in our functions, such as people services, finance, training and development. So I'm absolutely confident that we've got the ability to respond to the direction of travel of the government. It is welcome. I add a slight caveat to this, is that policing is a broader church than neighbourhood policing, and as the Chief Constable, it is my job to make sure that I balance resources across the risks, threats and harms right across the county to keep people safe. Some of that is about people, some of it is about infrastructure and investment in technology, and making sure that we are investing in the very latest technology to keep ahead of the people who would seek to do harm in our communities. So I do have a slight caveat about funding being ring-fenced at a central government level, purely around people, but it is welcome, and absolutely we need to work collectively to make sure that we implement it in the best way, to make sure that we can continue to drive down crime across North Yorkshire and continue to keep people safe.
Thanks. Just a quick follow-up before we move on to the next thing. Just if you could, one of the big challenges that we've got obviously is around our balance between the rural areas, the significant rural areas, coastal communities and our cities. Just anything you can say about the balance that we should be trying to strike with that in terms of the neighbourhood policing teams that I know you're looking at the moment, but also just in terms of what difference the public might see if they were, say, in York in the city or in a village in, you know, one of the more rural communities like Craven or Hambleton. Just if you could just say a little bit more, and then we'll move on to the next area.
I mean, it's interesting. I'm sure as a deputy mayor, when you meet the public, one of the things you're asked about all the time is something very similar that I get asked about whenever I go to a public meeting, is about visibility. That's been the same in all the police forces I've worked in over the years, but it's a particular challenge here because we're policing 3,200 square miles. We do seek to be visible in communities. We make sure that our patrols are targeted around areas of high footfall to make sure that people do see us. But also we need to be about when people aren't about, because we need to be out when people are committing crime to make sure that we deter them, and when they do it, that we catch them. And it's important to make sure that we build a balance of resources, not just across our neighbourhood function, but right across our frontline policing function, across the force, to make sure that we can target the risk and the threat and harm right across the county. In terms of building a sense of safety, that's one of the reasons we do our intensification days every month, so people see the full range of policing resources that are available, and they see them at times that's visible. But we're about when people aren't about, and I hope that some of the results that we've talked about earlier today, in terms of how we're responding better to the public, we're picking up the phone quicker, we're driving down crime, we are driving down antisocial behaviour, we are arresting more people, we are charging more people. All of that contributes to a force that's absolutely on the side of the communities of York and North Yorkshire. And I've been crystal clear, if you're a criminal that wants to come into this county and make people's life a misery, the chances of being caught here are higher than they are in our surrounding forces, and we're out there and we're going to make sure that we target them.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, absolutely, and I know that balance of visibility and building public confidence is really tricky in a county the size of ours. And yes, people raise it with me all the time. In fact, it's one of our public questions at the end. So I appreciate the challenge, and it just is a real challenge between the making sure that people are seeing a police resource in the places where we really need it, where there is high levels of crime, and that's, you know, usually where those intensification events are taking place, but also in the places where maybe there is less crime, but actually we still need to maintain public confidence. So it is a really tricky balance, but thank you for that. I'm just going to move on to, I wanted to ask about missing people, and I know that I certainly see on social media a number of posts asking for help with missing people, particularly I'm sharing the post of Neighbourhood Forces when someone goes missing close to our borders. We've got extensive borders around the county. Just really, whether you could just clarify at what point we get involved in the missing person cases for the places like Lancashire and Cleveland where someone's got links to North Yorkshire, and anything you can add on that.
Yeah, so at all times, a particular police force, whether it's us or whether it's one of our neighbouring forces, will have ownership of a missing person investigation. And during the course of that investigation, if we start to discover evidence that suggests that they're definitely in another county, we formally transfer ownership of that investigation. So, you know, we have people who go missing in York that end up in Leeds and Bradford. When we find out, so it might be through CCTV, it might be through work we do around the movements of telephones, financial inquiries, whatever else it might be, that it looks highly likely that they're in Leeds or Bradford, we'll then formally transfer that to West Yorkshire Police, for example. However, when they're found and they return, you'll be aware that we, as part of our restructure last year, we set up a missing and exploitation team. One, because we want to make sure that those particularly young people who are vulnerable to exploitation, that we pick up on the risks, that we're managing and we're working with partners to mitigate that. And where it's appropriate that we start taking action against people where they've been the victim of criminal offences, we do that. But it's primarily about problem solving. What's caused that young person to go missing? And that's led to a 30% reduction this year in terms of missing person incidents. And that's really important because it keeps young people safer, but they're hugely complex tasks for us. When we're not doing that, it gives us the opportunity to concentrate on the issues that matter most to the communities of North Yorkshire. And that is about driving down crime and antisocial behaviour and being visible in communities. So it's a really good investment by us. Missing people, though, remain a priority. You know, when people go missing, particularly young people, it's important that they're found, and it's important that they're safeguarded.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I had a meeting with the charity that leads on missing people nationally, just trying to understand where the good practice is from other parts of the country in terms of work that they are places that they are working with and work that they're commissioning or being involved with as well, because I know how important it is for the force. Just to move on, I wanted to also ask about the right to know guidance and stalking. So allowing people to get peace of mind around the identities of their abusers. It was just really how we manage our stalking cases, at what point a victim might be told the identity of their offender, or under what circumstances they might not be told about the identity of their offender in terms of stalking.
I think the first thing I just want to say is stalking is a really serious crime, and if you're a victim of stalking, it can be an absolutely haunting experience, and we're determined to do everything that we can, one, to deal with that offending and to support victims. So they're managed, depends on the circumstances of the case. All stalking cases get a risk assessment. High risk cases are managed by detective sergeants within our safeguarding teams. Other cases might be managed by uniform officers across the force, but there's always a risk assessment that makes sure that we can properly understand the risk, not just on this occasion, but getting a proper story and understanding the history of what's gone on. in terms of, so we take it very, very seriously, and absolutely we're determined to support people. The only circumstances where we might not reveal the identity of the stalkers if we think that it might undermine the evidential integrity of the investigation, and there's pretty limited circumstances where we'd do that, but obviously on occasions it's necessary to do that. But where that ceases to be the case, you know, we would normally seek to do that. So it's a very limited set of circumstances where we wouldn't reveal the identity of the stalker, because obviously someone knowing about it gives them the best opportunity to be able to report further instances and things like that. So
yeah, great, thank you. And finally, apologies, there was quite a few this month. Just to ask about, we've already touched on the trends around retail crime, but just anything else you can say around the target prevention on retail crime, and any consideration that's been given to the review of retail crime packs, which was an issue raised with me certainly a few times before Christmas.
we continue to look at that, but this is a high it's a high volume offence, and we need to work with retailers to do this, and that sense of partnership with the retailers is really, really important. The other bit is about prevention. Is you can't enforce your way out of this. Working through prevention and how stores are set out is really, really important. One of the things that we're going to do, you know, well, before I go on to talk about my main point, is I definitely think that, you know, having been here 10 months now, and I think with some of our previous performance in this regard, some retailers still think we're not bothered about shoplifting. It's not worth sending back retail packs because the police won't do anything about it. Well, I would just like to say in public that is very clearly not the case. And as I say, if you look at the number of offenders that we are arresting and the number of crimes that we are solving, and if you look across the course of the year, whilst we still have an increase in crime at this point during the financial year, it's not as a significant increase as it was earlier on in the year. So we are having an impact by the work that we are doing. What we are going to do, and I've asked ACC Ben Mosley to lead on this, is in the next month or two, we're going to have a retail crime symposium. We're going to invite in the security managers and area managers of some of our main stores to talk about the work that we're doing, to talk about options, how we can improve our preventative work. And of course, in that, we'll talk about the retail crime pack. It tends to be, I'm not saying that this is exclusive, but it tends to be the very big stores that've got the lowest rate of return of retail packs. So if you look at our big supermarkets, Tesco, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, that's where we get the lowest return rates. And what we really need to do, I think, is work with those because they're the same offenders who are offended in Sainsbury's and then offending in some of our small businesses, and where perhaps you know, a big supermarket where the time involved is seen as not worth it. Actually, if we were to have more success there, that will prevent and deter offenders coming into localities. So it's a really important, complex picture. We absolutely have to work with retailers.
Yeah, thank you. Deputy Chief Constable, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know the Chief mentioned it there, but our retail crime leaders has putting together a symposium over the next.
With
which I think will be really to kind of get that feedback as well, isn't it, on our response? So yeah.
Thank you, and certainly my experience when I was talking to businesses before Christmas was that actually it's really patchy. So some retailers take it incredibly seriously and are really diligent and have put their own resources into it. Others not so much, and actually, and just kind of, you know, it's just a business line for them. And actually, us understanding from a kind of public safety point of view and from a business point of view, just, you know, what we need to do to support those businesses that maybe aren't taking it as seriously as some others. You know, it's not, this isn't just a matter for the police. I know the mayor is particularly keen to make
Yeah.
sure, he's a retailer, you know, he's really keen through the Mayor's High Street Fund to ensure that there is a kind of really joined up approach to some of that. And that isn't all about policing, it's about making sure that we're working with businesses and talking to them about what they can do that isn't going to be that resource intensive to make a really big difference to those kind of crimes, which is, as you say, really damaging for not just the big businesses, but some of the really small shops as well.
And I think, you know, when I talk about how do you tackle this, is, you know, if you could stick a police officer on the front door of every business in the town centre, you wouldn't have any shoplifting. Well, quite clearly, we can't do that. I think some of it's about our response and offender management. The other bit is about how do we use things like Shop Watch as part of our neighbourhood offer. What does that look like in terms of both ourselves, and the retailers and the private security understanding who the key offenders are? Where does facial recognition support that? Because I think that's a really interesting development that we're not using, but there's opportunities to do that, to make sure that we make it a really hostile environment for anyone who wants to come and commit this kind of crime. And I think that's the key, is make it a hostile environment, and people won't do it, or they'll go elsewhere and do it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That was it from me on the spotlight stuff, and I think that means we're on to the third-party reports, and I think it's Deputy Chief Constable again. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so I've tried to keep these brief, but I know you get updates in the executive board as well. So we'll just move on to the next slide, please. So this is quite a key time for us, and you'll have heard me speak about the importance of January, February, March of this year, particularly in terms of the previous Peel report, which is now around 12 months old. So just at the top, you'll see the Peel report. That's police efficiency and effectiveness. So they're the main reports that the inspectorate HMIC do for forces. And our last one was published around February, March of last year, with the inspection having taken place in the October and November of the year before. We got 11 areas for improvement out of that report. As a result of that, our approach to managing anything that comes from inspection is we put an improvement plan behind it, a milestone plan, being clear about the actions that we need to take. We are working to finalise, and I'll come on to the next slide in a moment, the AFIs from that report. We've got, during February and March, time put aside to work with our force liaison officer from HMIC. The important bit isn't just taking the action. The really important bit is the assurance that sits underneath of that, because we need the evidence to be able to properly write off and address the issues that were raised with us, and make sure we're operating in a way that addresses the deficiencies that were identified. So that's the Peel element. We have other, though it's not just Peel, we have other reports that affect North Yorkshire Police. So we've got 2 recommendations outstanding from a previous National Child Protection Inspection report. One was about giving sufficient support to the child protection investigations. They're the conversations that we're having about the investment in the vulnerability assessment team. That's about putting additional capacity to protect children across North and North Yorkshire when there's a requirement, because of the information either partners have received or that we have seen, to do an enhanced level of safety planning around that child. So whether that be a formal strategy meeting or something else, we are just, because of work we've done over the last couple of years, submitting a far higher level of public protection notices that need that enhanced level of discussion with partners and planning. So that's not an immediate AFI that you can just address, but we are getting very close to being able to do that. So they will start to be submitted working with the inspectorate. And we have 9 recommendations outstanding from a previous custody inspection. Not something really maybe as obvious to the public, but when we lock people up, we need somewhere to put them. And we need somewhere to put them, and where we put them is in custody, which is a highly regulated, safety conscious environment, and probably one of our higher risk areas of policing. So we've had a comprehensive estate improvement plan, some remedial works across our custody estate. 1 site's complete, the other 2 are underway. We'd expect those to be complete by June and July. but that all relates to our capital programme and funding and how quickly that's delivered. So a number of AFIs addressed through there. We have 37 recommendations tonight from other thematic national reports. So that may well be custody, it could be stalking and harassment. And of course, we have super complaints as well, a number of recommendations from there. So this is a comprehensive approach that the Deputy Chief Constable owns, but we have identified leads for every single one of these areas that are held to account on a monthly basis through the Risk and Assurance Board in North Yorkshire Police. And I report that by exception into the Chief and then onto yourself through the Executive Board. In terms of emerging work, so we had the Serious and Organised Crime Inspection with HMIC during November. We had a hot debrief delivered to the force around that, but we're not sure when that report's going to land with us. I think it'll be within the next 3 months or so, once it comes to us for checking. And then very recently, we had the Integrity Inspection report published yesterday. That took place in July 2024. It says on here, that's how recent it is. We expected it to land with us. It did. It came yesterday. As soon as we got the draft report in October, we made sure that we put an improvement plan with clear milestones in, clear actions we were taking. We've already taken some significant action around the recommendations that have been made around leadership, around some of our focus on how we work with partners to protect the community from police officers that might be corrupt and want to, for example, abuse their relationships with them because they might be vulnerable victims. So there's a whole host of work that's come out of that we're already on with addressing, and we will report that within the next 8 to 12 weeks to Executive Board about the progress that we've made on that inspection, which I know we've already had a conversation about.
Yeah, thank you. And look, and I think the other thing, just in terms of public assurance, is that there are conversations that go on at least a monthly basis about the work that's taking place to monitor progress and just to ensure that the issues that are raised are being kind of picked up, which you know, that this is a kind of snapshot of a huge amount of work that I know is going on separately, and particularly that the report that dropped this week, that was work that was already underway to address some of those issues that obviously that initial inspection, I think that was my first week when the inspectorate were in, but that work is already underway between both the police force and the areas that sit within the OPFCC. That work is taking place already and was already taking place before the formal report has been published this week, and is something that we'll obviously continue to monitor, and it will come back to this meeting as a standing item as it does with the other inspection updates. Anything else you want to add before we move on to the questions?
Yeah, just move on to the next slide very quickly. This
sorry.
Just no, it's okay. It's just to take 30 seconds. So the exceptions really I want to raise on here, we've probably covered a lot of them, and what you'll see is our performance framework really provides some testing and level of assurance around the progress we're making. So if you look at AFI 2, for example, we've already talked about the improvements and how we're addressing that equalities data. If you look at AFI 4, we've already spoken about the continuing to improve how we answer 999 calls. If you look at AFI 6, which talks about appropriate outcomes for victims, more work to do. I think we're very open with that about achieving better outcomes, but you can see the improvement. What I'm trying to say here is that the performance framework and how we structure it directly correlates with the areas of improvement that come through our reports. So in having the first conversation about performance, you can see how it starts to relate to some of the direction we've been given by the inspectorate. That was all I wanted to say on that.
That's really helpful. Yeah, thank you. We can move on, and I think Rebecca can put up the first of our public questions. So I should just say on the public questions that there were a couple of questions that came in extremely late, and certainly, well, two things really. One was that there's a couple of questions that related to individual cases that have been raised, which will be addressed with people individually. And also, I think there was a late question that came in that was a data request, which we will also address in writing, just because it was much easier to do it that way, to provide that data rather than running around today to try and pull that together. But we can, this is the first question. There were these people are not they're not at all related. They just came in on the same topic, which is why they've come in on the same slide. So Mark from Malton and Nick from Scarborough, both with questions relating to fox hunting, and North Yorkshire Police is dealing how they deal with illegal fox hunts, antisocial behaviour and criminal activity relating to fox hunting, and responding to reports or relating to the illegal activities of hunts. And then from Nick in Scarborough, increasing public demand for the ban on trail hunting, and North Yorkshire Police challenge to the police on investing in specialist training. I don't know which of you is able to come back on any of those.
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer this. I mean, the answer to it is that we do deal with illegal hunting, and that's a core task for our rural task force, which we invest significant resources into our rural task force here in North Yorkshire, and they are absolute specialists in terms of the legislation. And indeed, when I was on duty over in Knaresborough just before Christmas, I was talking to our rural task force. Many of them were working on Boxing Day because of the hunting that takes place on Boxing Day, and they were geared up for it. So we continue to do that. I appreciate hunting. There's a number of hunts that operate across the county. I appreciate that it's a matter of public concern, and the law is the law, and we will enforce it. And that's one, as I say, it's one of the core tasks of the rural task force. As regards to the second part of the question, is, as I say, my understanding is the legislation has not changed at the moment. If new legislation is proposed that brings in new regulations, very clearly that we will continue to make sure that our officers are up to date with new legislation, just as we do across a range of areas.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Next question, please. I'll read it out. Oh, okay. Alistair in York, crime in Huntington. So the question is about what's happening to reduce crime and high and low level crime in Huntington and on Huntington Road. Someone who has made a report and not had a response, which we will pick up separately as an individual issue. But I don't know if there's anything you can add about anything particular that has been happening in that part of the city.
Well, we've been continuing to target resources to reduce crime in York, and again, just by way of overview, if you look at crime over the last 6 months in Huntingdon compared to the previous 6 months, it's 6.5% lower. And if you look at antisocial behaviour over the last 6 months in Huntingdon compared to the previous 6 months, it's 4.9% lower. So we continue to target it principally through our neighbourhood response, but also our broader policing efforts across York. So, as I say, as I've articulated in a number of different guises over the course of the last hour, we're managing risk, threat and harm across the county, but we're trying to do it in a way that makes sure that everyone understands that we're on their side, and will continue to drive down crime right across the city of York.
Thank you. Just on that one, the Clearhold Build is operating in Clifton. I know the geography of this part of the city, obviously, probably better than most people do. But it is possible, and it just may be worth the force just making sure that we aren't seeing spikes in particular types of crime and antisocial behaviour around Huntington Road, and Huntington are kind of pretty close geographically to Clifton, and where the Clearhold Build operations are taking place. So it may just be worth us making sure that we aren't seeing any repercussions that are falling out of a Clearhold Build operation into a neighbouring area, which that would be. So it's not one for now, but it may just be worth us picking that up separately.
it's something we keep an eye on, but as I say, certainly over the last 6 months, crime has been every month consistently lower.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Next question, please. This is from Gwen in York about urban. We've actually talked about this a little bit already in terms of the neighbourhood policing conversation, but rural task force versus urban task force. So obviously we've just had a conversation about hunting and the rural task force. She's asking about what happened to the urban task force and what is going on in urban areas as opposed to rural areas.
Well, as I articulated, is we have to try and balance our resources across the board. And it is a fact that in the urban areas where there's a greater population, there is a greater proportion of crime and disorder, and that does get a greater amount of the resources. I won't say a greater proportion of the resources, but it does get a lot of coverage. And the City of York, in particular, Operation Titan we've got running is a multi-agency operation to tackle drugs. We've got Operation Ignition, which is our response to theft of motorbikes, and another operation to deal with cycle thefts in the city. We have significant operations targeting violence against women and girls around the city centre, and we've got dedicated retail crime officers that are dealing with that. And if you look at where we are in the City of York, robberies down by 14% financial year to date. Theft of motor vehicles is down by 24%. Theft from motor vehicles down by 5%. Antisocial behaviour in the City of York is down 21% this year. And just only last week, you saw some of our response numbers, but last week the City of York had a 95% response rate to get into emergency calls within that SLA that we talked about before. So we're absolutely focused on urban crime, protecting people in urban communities, but also we talk about the rural task force. It may well be the case that we talk about the rural task force because it's covering such a vast area, and I want people to know that we're not leaving rural communities behind.
Yeah, and look, there is a tricky balance which we just were talking about in terms of neighbourhood policing, in terms of how you balance that visible public reassurance that you might need in some of the rural areas with the urban areas where there'll be more crime and harm and risk potentially to the population. Hopefully that has addressed Gwen's question. Can we move on to the next question, which I think is about the drink and drug driving campaigns that operated just before Christmas? So it was about the numbers of offences that took place, and if you can say anything about what is taking place to reduce the risk, particularly over Christmas and the New Year.
Yeah, I have to say, I found in 2024, 2025, the fact that within 1 month at Christmas, 150 people will get behind the wheel, in excess of 150 people get behind the wheel of a car, having had too much to drink or having taken drugs. I find it quite staggering. It is exceedingly dangerous. It is exceedingly dangerous. This is what leads to people being killed on the roads. We will continue to enforce this, not just through our roads policing group, but also through our broader uniform workforce out and about around the county. Drinking and driving, or taking drugs and driving, puts individuals who are doing it at risk. It puts the public at risk, and if you're caught, you will be banned from driving. And if you end up injuring someone, worse still, killing someone, you'll go to prison. It's as simple as that. And I just really appeal that people do not do this. There is absolutely no need to do it. It's a dreadful offence.
Yeah, thank you. And certainly, I suppose the other part of this is if people are aware that people are getting behind the wheel when they shouldn't be, either that they themselves should, or if they don't feel that they're able to, Crime Stoppers or the emergency service numbers are there for that purpose as well. Because ultimately, I was at the Road Safety Partnership just before Christmas, watching some awful footage of people getting behind the wheel who absolutely shouldn't be, as people know. But thank you, Philip from Pickering, for your question. We will move on, I think, to one on speeding. I think it is. Oh no, it's Hilary from York on vandalism. She has raised a particular case which we will pick up separately, but just around vandalism in this. This is again a City of York question, and what is happening around vandalism beyond a specific crime reference number report. I think this must have been damage to either property or a vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, we do take it seriously. You know, in the you know, offences of vandalism are recorded as criminal damage. It's really important that people do report it. We've seen a 5% reduction in the City of York this year in terms of vandalism, and we will investigate it. And you know, we will, you know, if we can identify the offender, we will prosecute them. It's as simple and straightforward as that.
Thanks. I actually called one in myself just between Christmas and New Year when I saw one. Next one, please. Yes, speeding on residential areas. So it would be useful, if possible, Chief Constable, if you could just clarify the police's role in this, because obviously there's also a council role in terms of some of the enforcement, not the enforcement part, but in terms of the maintaining speed limits in the city in particular, if this is a York question.
Indeed, there's absolutely, I mean, in terms of setting speed limits and designing roads to minimise speeding, particularly in urban and residential areas, it's absolutely the responsibility of the local authority as the highways agency for the city to do that. I absolutely recognise the impact that speeding, particularly in urban areas where you've got young children around, narrow footways, and in York as well. You know, I was out in York just before Christmas, dense crowds around the place. It's very easy for people to step on the pavement. Speeding puts people at risk. We do a lot of enforcement of speeding. We don't do it just for the sake of it. We respond to areas where we have you know, high numbers of people killed and seriously injured. We do it in response to public complaints. So if there is a specific area that Ian feels that cars are speeding, please let us know specifically where it is, because we will do something about it. So you know, we do take it seriously. Speed is the #1 cause of people being killed on the road. It's simple as that. And we talk about drink drive, we talk about use of mobile phones, talk about people not using seat belts, but the #1 cause of people getting killed on the road is speeding. So we take it very seriously.
Thank you. And just to reiterate that is there is obviously a partnership, a road safety partnership between the police, the fire service, and the local authorities and the combined authority. I had meetings, I think 14 of them earlier this week, with parish councils across the patch to talk to them about the speed limits and any other wider issues that they had, in order that we can address that kind of designing out issue as part of a partnership approach with the local authorities, rather than, obviously enforcement is part of it and the police have got their role there, but there is also that whole as you say, speed limit setting, which is the responsibility of the local authorities, which we will work with them through the road safety partnership on that. I think that is the last question, and so therefore I can thank everyone for their time this afternoon. The next meeting, I've been given this information and I've lost it, is in March, I think. Yes, the 20th of March 2025, where we are, we'll be looking at that force data again. Thank you for your time this afternoon, and look forward to seeing you next time.